Welcome to Season 2, Episode 11 of The Life of a Servant. This episode features the uncut interview by John Oakley with Dennis Mills, originally aired on 6:40 a.m. in Toronto in early December 2024. John talks about Dennis's newest memoir, From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair, and how a couple of chairs ended up becoming a metaphor for a life in service. And while John dives deep into the details of the book itself becomes a metaphor for servant leadership. For those people interested in running for public office, this episode, and the book it's based on, is a call to action. In fact, John Oakley points out that From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair can be used as a manual for any aspiring public servant. The back-and-forth conversation around service as a basis for leadership then segues into the really tough questions about political leadership in Canada. Enjoy listening to this episode and loop back by telling us what you think. And be sure to let us know if you have the passion, commitment, and aspiration for a life in service.
Got an erstwhile Liberal MP, a good friend of mine, close to 30 years, Dennis Mills, with me in the studio because he's got a wonderful book out now, which is effectively a memoir, a series of essays that do chronicle a life well lived to this point and continuing from the wood chair to the green chair. Dennis, good to have you in studio. Good afternoon.
John, always great to be in your studio.
Well, listen, I got to start, just clarify the title, From the Wooden Chair to the Green Chair.
So, John, 2 years ago, I went into my neighbor's garage up in Muskoka, giving me some extra space, and I noticed this wooden chair against the wall, and I said, George, can I look at that chair? And I went up to it and turned it around, and on the back was the brand, Chairman Mills. It was an 80-year-old chair from the company that my grandfather had started 110 years ago, Chairman Mills. And I said, George, that chair's been at the opening of the Seaway. That chair's been at the opening of the Avro. That thing is a real genuine antique. So George gave me that chair, and I went back to my cottage and started thinking all the very special events that this chair, bar mitzvahs, weddings, openings of city halls, you name it. And I started to think not just about that wood chair and its experience, but all the various people in my life that I've come into contact that emanated from that experience in the family business, which ultimately led to my doing a project for the government of Canada in 1978. And the then Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, walked through that project at the CNE, and he liked the project. It was a big government of Canada, here's what we do for you thing. And he said, you should come and work with me. Well, I obviously thought he was joking. The following year, I walked the Conservative leadership through the event. They did it a second time. And then Prime Minister Trudeau was back in business and is in spring of 80. And his chief of staff called me up and said, let's have lunch at Franz. And I met with him, and the next thing you know, I was a young assistant working in Ottawa, a space that I knew very little about, John. And then after that, came back when Prime Minister Trudeau resigned. And then in 87, when Prime Minister Mulroney, who I have a lot of high regard and respect for and loved being associated with him, even though we were on opposite sides of the house, and I decided that I was going to challenge his view on the Meech Lake Accord, because I am a passionate believer in a strong national government, and I thought Prime Minister Mulroney was decentralizing. So I decided to run in Toronto Danforth. I was 1,000-to-1 shot, but we had a great team of volunteers, and lo and behold, we won. And the next thing you know, I'm sitting in a green chair. And from that green chair experience, I've had lots of great memories of doing great events. I never found it work. I thought it an honor to work in the nation's boardroom, the court, the last court in the land, And the purpose of this book, John, From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair, is to try and motivate 4 or 5 of your listeners to get involved in public service, get involved in public life.
There you go. Santiago, it pays better. You might want to consider that. But, you've said something really interesting here. Okay, so this is now kind of the synopsis of your travel from, the family business, Chairman Mills, the wood chair, and then you go to the green chair in the House of Commons. And along the way, all the connections that you have cemented, the relationships you built was really fascinating because it came into fruition no more so than, say, this is one of the highlights of your career, I'm sure, Sarstock, or as Molson, Canadian Rocks, Toronto. All the favors that you called in, the connections that you had made.
Well, you just nailed it right there in one sentence, because when Michael Cole had just started his business in the promotion rock and roll business, he was like 18, I was like 18, and he would have the bands and we'd have the stage and the chairs out in the park in the west side of the city, and then he would go and do the C&E and he'd put on the shows. We'd have the chairs there. So even though we were always behind, like Michael, behind the scenes, we were like the loadout team. We were the first in and the last to go. And because of that, you develop relationships. And it was that very special relationship in 2003 where I went up to Michael Cole's office on Avenue Road, right across from the Hare Krishna Temple, walked upstairs, walked into him and said, Michael, the city's here. This is like 40, 50 years later. And I said, Michael, the city's been good to you. The city's been good to me. You have the stones. I'll deliver the government. Let's send a signal to the rest of the world. And Michael, to his credit, said, I'll call the boys tonight. They're on tour in Europe. And the following morning, I had a fax from Michael saying the boys are prepared to do it. And if I hadn't had that history in the relationship from being his servant on his rock and roll shows when I was a teenager, I don't think I would have ever been able to just walk into his office.
That's a fascinating account, Dennis Mills. I wanted to follow up on that because, the backstory to that was the United Nations had declared Toronto a no-go zone because of SARS in 2003.
Yes, the World Health Organization, yes.
Yeah, and when you had sort of convened this group of individuals, or you were a party to it, where they said, well, we can do something maybe the following year, you didn't take that for an answer. And I know you. It's like you want it done yesterday. You said, we can do this now.
Well, you see, I was a member of Parliament that had over 300 restaurants. Everybody in this community knows the Danforth, so let's just say was part of my riding. But in my office, my constituency office was on the Danforth, and when SARS hit, the bottom fell right out of those restaurants. I mean, this was no joke. This was almost like a COVID-like environment. And when this group from the private sector got together and said, well, we can come up with a plan, but it's going to be for next year, a promotion, tell the world, tourism, etc. I said, guys, that ain't going to do for my gang, because they won't be able to see September, October. We got to do something now. And it was that moment where I said, well, with respect, I want to try another pathway. And there were no hard feelings or anything. And that's when I ran right up to Avenue Road and saw Michael Cole. And I credit Michael Cole with having the same kind of caring for our community and the same kind of activism, something that you wouldn't ordinarily think of when you think of rock and roll promoters. But there he was, and he said, and 10 weeks later we had the biggest event in the history of our country.
Yeah, but Downsview Park, it wasn't your first choice. There was thought given to the Portlands being used.
That is fact.
And then it's just, having the Rolling Stones there certainly is a linchpin, but there was something else, I guess, the Molson affiliation that put it over the top, and everything just sort of fell into place.
You touched on Molson's. Well, here's what happened there. I was the most hated man in Canada for 24 hours when I released the facts that said the Rolling Stones will do this, but they want $13 million. And it wasn't 13 million for the Stones. It was that Michael projected that's what it was going to take to stage the event. Well, the phone calls, the radio shows like yours, I don't mean you specifically, but they just said, who is this idiot MP who wants to use our taxpayers' money to pay the Rolling Stones? And so caucus colleagues, they said, well, you've just cost me my seat. I'm out of here. The abuse I took. And then one day I was on one of the talk shows. It was a couple of days later. And I said, look, what if we had the private sector pay for the artists and the government pay for the infrastructure, like the washrooms, like the security, whatever? And the callers turned on a dime and said, that we can accept. And that night, I was in a bar on King Street where I knew Dan O'Neill, the then president of Molson's, walked in, and he walked right over to me and he said, Dennis, I am not giving you $10 million. and I said to him, Dan, we only need 5. You look after the artists, we'll look after the other stuff. And the following morning he came back and he said, we're in. And without Molson's, we couldn't have, we wouldn't have been able to move ahead because the public support was not there. But that, the signal that it sent to the rest of the world that we, Toronto, were back in business. And the collaboration that we received in 10 weeks from all levels of government, from the then police chief, Fantino. I can't express the importance of Chief Fantino. Prime Minister Chrétien said to me, he said, Dennis, we are not getting behind this project unless the chief's on side. And so I called Chief Fantino. And 7:30 the next morning, I was in his office, and he was in the middle of a very serious case. The young girl that was killed on the west side of the city in Parkdale there, Holly, I can't remember her last name. But at any rate, I said, look, Chief, Chrétien's not going to get behind this unless you're on side. Oh, I was in Rome about 2 months ago, and I saw Paul McCartney with 500,000 people. There was no problem. What do you need from me? I said, I need a letter that I can give to the Prime Minister's office. And within an hour, I had the letter, and away we went.
Yeah, you got 500,000 people up at Downsview, and it was not just the Stones, AC/DC, Rush, Burton Cummings, Michael Cole, because you guys were, effectively kids, and you were staging shows. You did the chair start, and that was where the wood chair comes in his book, the title, Wood Chair to the Green Chair. Green Chair references the time he spent in the House of Commons. What was it, a dozen years?
16.
Oh, geez, Dennis, time
16,
flies.
20 years on the Hill.
Well, you know what's interesting, because you've served under Prime Ministers Pierre Trudeau, also Jean Chrétien,
yes,
and Paul Martin.
Paul Martin, short time, yes.
Right. And I think you were there in the Mulroney years, too, no?
Oh, well, I was elected in 88. Prime Minister Mulroney was running the show then. He was the Prime Minister. I was in opposition for 5 years. And I want to say something about Prime Minister Mulroney. Now, I had the experience as a young assistant in Prime Minister Trudeau's office, so I had some experience in understanding how the machinery of government works. And I can tell you, as a rookie opposition MP, I had the highest regard for Prime Minister Mulroney because he was a collaborator with opposition members. If I had a difficult immigration issue and I could walk across the floor and speak to his immigration minister, or if when we did the Canada 125, the then Joe Clark was the Foreign Affairs Minister in charge of Canada 125. We did a project together. And I'll never forget one time, this goes direct to Prime Minister Mulroney. I had a very serious and a very difficult case. And being a former PMO, Prime Minister aide, I knew the switchboard of the Prime Minister's office. And I'll never forget calling Brian Mulroney at 24 Sussex. He came on the phone, Dennis, what can I do for you? And I told him, and I tell you, within a day, the whole issue was solved. And for the rest of my life, I never stopped telling the story of the accessibility of Prime Minister Mulroney to a rookie MP in opposition. It was just a phenomenal exchange we had.
But going through, in the 20 years, effectively, as you've experienced with different leadership, there's an accusation today that there's a deficit of true leadership. And I mean, let's talk about your party. I mean, whether the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau. Dennis, be frank with me. I mean, we've always talked candidly with one another. How do you feel about the state of affairs?
Well, I'm obviously any Liberal that's really going to be candid is brokenhearted. I mean, we're a car without wheels on it right now. I mean, that's just the if you were Justin Trudeau sitting here with me, I would say, Prime Minister, I really wish you would go to the Governor General, call an election today, make the target the Bloc Québécois, speak for Canada. You probably will not win in that election, but at least you can remind Canadians that the Bloc Québécois is in ascendancy right now. They will probably be the official opposition after the next election. We already know Legault said today that he's prepared to have a Quebec constitution ready for 2026. And I think that Justin Trudeau's one last gift to Canada could be waking us up that we're on a pathway to separation. And that's why I would urge him to call an election tomorrow. Forget about this Jasmeet Singh thing and just get on with it and get some wheels back on the Government of Canada car.
Yeah, so you're saying it's irreconcilable, though. He has no chance of winning or even competing or contesting in a credible way.
You mean the next election?
Yeah.
No, even speaking for Canada. That's it's like a plane. Once a plane goes beyond the power curve and you can't pull it up, it's over. Well, it's really, it's that simple. And it's not anybody that would tell you that the Liberal Party can win the next election is just, it's just not, it's not serious. But what is serious, and I'm imagining you're the Prime Minister, I'd say, forget all these opposition votes because whatever the issue is, there's only one issue right now that Justin Trudeau can sort of make a mark with, and that's speaking for Canada and waking Canadians up that the Bloc Québécois is coming at us hard.
I just think a lot of Canadians or Canada's tuned them out.
But they won't tune out an election.
Well, no, they're gonna...
and it'll also give the possible new Prime Minister Poilievre a good forewarning that hey, look, you better get your head around this whole wave of separatism that's emerging in Quebec.
You see it rearing its head credibly,
big time.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Now, it's something that I found fascinating. You wanted to be a priest originally, and you said your real problem though was blind obedience, and that played a role when it came to a political decision that you had to make that, in effect, I was a party to.
You were.
I remember this was on the GST matter with Jean Chrétien. They had promised, I guess, in the budget that they were going to scrap the GST.
Well, the 93 campaign, our leader, Jean Chrétien, who I adore, who wrote the foreword to this book, we, the Liberal Party, made a promise to scrap the GST. We were elected with a massive majority, and the first budget came along, and we did nothing. But you had called me on a radio show before the budget and said, what would happen if in the budget up and coming your party did nothing? And I said, well, I'd probably, I don't know what I'd do, but I'd probably ask to move my seat or something. Well, the day after the budget motion came out and there was nothing done to the GST, I know that Oakley, he's probably got that interview taped. And this, I swear on all my children's lives, I was driving along St. Clair Avenue, going to St. Mike's, and my phone rang, and it was you. And my instincts that day were I was so lucky because I had called the Speaker of the House, Gibby Perrant, that morning, and I said, move my seat across the floor.
You sat as an independent.
I sat as an independent for 9 months because I knew that I was going to be dead meat if I did nothing. And so I didn't vote against the budget because that's non-confidence in the government, but I abstained on the vote, moved my seat across. And so John Oakley came on the phone and said, hey, listen to this tape. And you had that tape of me saying I do something. And I said, John, I've got you. I've already spoken to the speaker, and bang, I'm across the floor. And
as a matter of principle.
It was a matter of principle, and it was a matter of trust to my constituents. And I think that that's the ultimate situation when you're in elected office. If your constituents don't trust you, you don't get reelected. And I'm proud to say that I had 4 good terms, and I considered it an honor, and I considered the reason why I got reelected was because a lot of people trusted me.
Well, it's interesting because there's that deficit in trust in our leaders. As much as we talked about a deficit in leadership, the trust factor is missing. I'll bring up something very contemporary. The federal finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, said on Monday that she hopes her government's proposed GST holiday is going to help bridge the gap between Canada's macroeconomic picture and historically stressed out households by bringing good vibes to the latter. Give a listen to what she had to say.
A lot of economists have been talking about the vibe session and the fact that Canadians just aren't feeling good, and that is having real economic consequences. And the Canadian economists making that point are right, that there is a disconnect between the real economic, the really positive economic news, the fact that the Canadian economy does appear set for a soft landing. That's good news. But Canadians aren't feeling it, and that is shaping their economic behavior in ways that are not great for the Canadian economy. People have been talking about a vibe session and how that is a challenge for the Canadian economy.
That's the finance minister. She's saying, yeah, hey, folks, you just got it wrong because all the economic indicators are solid. We're doing okay. It's just your own perception of things. I mean, is that a disconnect with reality?
I don't know what a vibe session is. I've never been in one.
Right.
So I really would have to understand more about what a vibe session is. But there are a lot of people in pain out there right now. There are a lot of this is serious stuff. It's not. This is not fiction. The cost of housing, the lack of housing, affordable housing. I mean, I have a home in Riverdale, and I mean, I've got 3 parks within 100 yards of my home where there are encampments, and I mean, I think the very least we should do if we're going to let people have encampments is give them quality tents. I mean, this is crazy. They're living in like these tarpaulins and things like it's crazy. I mean, so now that's not all economic. That's also health issues, right? Mm-hmm. But the reality is that the cost of living today is not fiction. I mean, we can't debate this. It's something we just have to face. It's tough.
Wouldn't you say, though, that this happened on Justin Trudeau's watch?
It happened on Justin Trudeau's watch, but it's not Justin Trudeau's fault. Okay, that's not this whole issue of our housing situation and the COVID thing was not his fault.
The head of the TTC has called out the police chief, and I'm guessing the mayor as well. Somebody else has got to implore her to step up and be more forthright and whatever else. Well, let's tackle that in a nutshell, Dennis. I mean, we talked about a dearth of leadership. Something's going on. There's a real shifting dynamic in society and a fraying of the social contract where people can basically feel emboldened to go into these protests, deface synagogues, even shoot places up. This is beyond just protests. There's something really ugly that's starting to take place. And I don't think there's enough leadership that's forceful enough in at least rallying all of us conscientious people to say this is not going to be acceptable. Well,
look, in the early 70s, we developed an act in Parliament. Pierre Trudeau put this act in place. It was called multiculturalism. And the act very specifically says we are a nation where no culture is less than or greater than another culture. That was the ideal that has been worked on for years. And that ideal in Canada and in our community, because we live here, we can see is breaking down. The disrespect for each other's cultures, and we're focused on the issue that you raised right now, which is undeniable. The anti-Semitism is just it's raging and it's out of control, and we need to somehow remind people of what the fundamental rules are when you come to this community. No culture is less than or greater than another culture. And when you start defacing or doing things that are trying to put another culture into a subservient position or a disrespectful position, you're going against the ideal of what Canadian society is all about. Now, talking about I don't see how the police can. I listened to part of your show in the previous segment. I don't see how the police can fix this. This has to be political leadership that starts to speak to the society and say, this is when you come to Toronto, you come to a community where no culture is less than or greater than another culture. Yeah, you can't go and do that stuff.
The police take their cues from the political leadership.
Well, that's what I mean by political leadership has to become much more active in their presence in the community. And I would suggest, and I mean, we've raised it, the John Denver picking up butts on the street. Well, maybe we've got to get political leadership with volunteers to go out there and start cleaning up some of these defamed walls and whatever.
But you got to stop the impulse to want to do this with impunity as well. That's the real key here, Dennis.
Yeah, well, you can only do that by. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you don't use the police, but we cannot sort of, you'd have to hire more police than you could ever, by the time you train them.
Well, we're all stakeholders, though. We've got to show revulsion at this rather than just sort of shrugging our shoulders and saying, well, this is the Jewish community's issue.
No, this is not the Jewish community's issue. This is the fundamental principle on our society that we are a community where no culture is less than or greater than another culture, and anybody that violates that, they are violating the basic citizenship of Canada.
We have to have each other's backs for sure. Again, with Dennis Mills, a few other things I wanted to pick on because I know you were so instrumental, obviously, with SARS stock, but you followed up with the interest of farms and food production. You had Farm Aid, different permutations of that. I remember once I was a party to it at the Danforth Music Hall in your own writing, and staged it there. Lightfoot, Murray McLaughlin, Jim Cuddy, Blue Rodeo.
Yes.
You rallied all the troops. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, here's what's going on in our country at that. What was going on then, our farmers in Western Canada, rural Ontario, were going through a very, very difficult financial period. Fiscally, some of these farms weren't even going to make it. And the rural MPs at that time were having a very difficult time getting the attention of the leadership to get that kind of support for farmers. Well, the biggest beneficiaries of farmers are a big city like Toronto. I mean, if you don't believe in farmers, then stop eating. You know what I mean? It's just crazy. And so what we agreed to do was I went to Steve Stavro. He gave us the big arena, and we put on a show there for the express purpose of rallying the city of Toronto to get behind the farmers. And we were very successful because the day after that event, Prime Minister Chrétien announced $1 billion package for all the farmers of Canada. And we, as Torontonians, out of sight, out of mind, we really forget the absolute necessity of having a healthy farm system in this country.
There's so much to talk about, and I forgot when we were talking about SARS stock and how this all came together. You gave us sort of the overview, and as much as that was the great story, there was still one component, because you managed to get this as well beamed out to all the ships at sea, and it went international because Senator Jerry Grafstein, with whom you were colluding on this,
absolutely couldn't have done it without
he put
Jerry.
a call into Washington and the Pentagon.
No. Here's what happened. Jerry, I had a friend who was running the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I called him and I said, "Can you give us the phone number to the Defense Secretary's office?" He did. And I said, "Jerry, you have to make this call because an MP in the United States of America means nothing but Senator Grafstein."
Right, sure.
So, I was there. And so Senator Grafstein called. The chief of staff to the defense secretary came on the line. "Well, we're doing this event and da-da-da-da-da. Senator, I'll get right back to you and give me half an hour." So about a half an hour later, the chief of staff, "Yes, Senator, we've got this looked after. We'll beam this project up to the 187 ships at sea. We'll get it to all our 150 bases all around the world, and we'll also put it up to the space station on our private defense, our special defense satellite." "Okay, Senator." "Yes, sir." "Okay, thank you." Bang, over.
Wow. Yeah. And that was leading me to my other question about up in space, the Canadarm. The name Canada is on it with the Canadian flag, and you were responsible for that being branded as well.
Well, what happened there, John, in 1980, Prime Minister Trudeau, Minister Jim Fleming, we had made a $140 million donation, the Government of Canada, to Spar Aerospace, who are building the space arm out in York West. And we went to the president and said, this is quite a sizable contribution to the space arm. We wondered if you could put the Canada word mark, that's Canada with the flag over the A, on the arm, because that would show Canadians that the government of Canada participated in this project. And his name was Shepard, and the president, and he did it. And the next thing you know, bang, when the space arm opened, there's the Canada word mark. And to this day, it's a celebrated achievement.
That's wonderful. It's just all part and parcel of the memoir here, these little stories, these little vignettes. Neil Diamond, you got him to sit in the Prime Minister's chair?
Oh, yeah. He was in Ottawa this particular day, and I had done an event with him many, many years ago. And I invited him to question period. He came, and one of the MPs saw him up in the gallery watching a question period, and I was sitting with him. And Paige came, gave me the note, and said, "Ask Neil to come to the Prime Minister's office after question period." And Neil agreed, and we walked into the Prime Minister's office. He was out of town, by the way, had the picture taken, and the lady who organized this hugged him and did, sang one of his songs to him. The next day, that lady stood up in the House of Commons, Shaughnessy Cohen, just a great, great person, and she had an aneurysm and died.
Oh boy!
And it was just, it was just a crazy, crazy 24 hours. But the excitement and everything else, it's just one of those crazy moments in life.
Well, and you've had many. It's here in the book. I mean, we didn't even talk about the Pope. You've met him several times, right?
Many times, 2 years going back and forth. I loved that project. It was the most special project of my life. And his last words to me, which I think of every day: "Be a peacemaker."
Well, it's interesting because you are
John
a servant.
Paul.
That's one of these principal themes in your book, as a servant and in public service and otherwise. And I know you want to implore more people to get actively engaged and serve.
Listen, that's the call to action in this memoir. You don't have to be a PhD or a lawyer from Harvard or Yale or U of T or wherever. I'm the son of a guy that built a business renting chairs and tables and dishes, and one customer led to the next and the next, and the next thing you know, you're sitting public service in the House of Commons. And I would appeal to your listeners out there. There's got to be a number of you that would just love the experience, the joy of serving your community, your country in the House of Commons. And I say, go home, get your wife or your partner on side and roll up your sleeves and go get it done, because there's no greater joy than serving your community and your country.
Well stated. It's all part and parcel of From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair, a memoir. Dennis Mills, thanks for coming in. Really had a lot
Always
of fun.
a pleasure, John. Good stuff. Thanks.
Yeah, many more adventures to come, I'm sure, and big ideas and projects.
You have been listening to The Life of a Servant, a Dennis Mills podcast. Visit dennismills.com for more information and archived episodes of this program.